So think of punctuation as like the traffic lights of your writing. If you don't have them, there's no indication for where you should stop, where you should start, where you should pause, and your ideas kind of just crash into each other and the whole thing becomes a bit of a mess, which is not what we want. So for our GCSEs, we follow the Pearson 2.0 specification. It's important to know that you're only actually marked for SpaG on question 7 and question 8 in papers 1 and 2. It's not that SpaG doesn't matter for the reading section. The examiner still needs to be able to understand what you're saying, but for your big writing tasks, your technical accuracy can make a massive difference to your final grade. So we'll look at punctuation and see how we're able to get some of those additional marks. Before we look at what not to do, let's think about the 3 main jobs of a comma. The easiest way to think of a comma is to think of it as a quick breath, a little pause for your reader. You've probably heard people talk about it like that before. Job 1 is for lists. You use them to separate 3 or more items so they don't get jumbled up. For example, I bought apples, pears and bananas. We've separated them nicely there. Job 2 is quite a big one for your SpaG marks, and it's an area where I think a lot of people tend to miss out on commas. It's what we call a fronted adverbial. This is just a fancy way of saying a phrase at the start of a sentence that tells us when, where or how something happened. You have to put a comma after it. So as an example, early that morning, comma, the birds sang. So the fronted adverbial in that sentence tells us when something happened. Job 3 is separating clauses. If you are joining 2 ideas with a word like but, and or so, the comma usually sits just before that joining word. So the example here, it was long, but it was worth it. The comma sits right in the middle before the joining word but. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when using commas is something called a comma splice. So a comma splice is when you try to join 2 full sentences together using only a comma. Let's look at why it doesn't work. I went to the park is a complete sentence on its own. It has the subject I and the verb went, and it makes perfect sense. It was very sunny is also a complete sentence. When you have 2 independent thoughts like these, a comma just isn't strong enough to hold them together. To fix it, you need something much sturdier. You can use a full stop to turn it into 2 separate sentences. You can add in a joining word, a connecting word, or you can use a semicolon. Now, semicolons are absolutely brilliant for boosting your writing levels. You can think of them kind of like a bridge between 2 full sentences that are very closely linked. So the example on the slide, the cake was delicious, I ate 3 slices. Both of those sentences are closely linked. They're both complete sentences. They would both make sense independently. We could take the semicolon out and replace it with a full stop, but instead of ending the sentence, we are continuing it on. Just remember the golden rules when it comes to the semicolons. Both sides need to be complete sentences, okay? Independent clauses. You don't need to use a capital letter after a semicolon unless it is a name or a place. And you do not need to use a connecting word afterwards, okay? If it said the cake was delicious, semicolon, and I ate 3 slices, it would not make sense. So very similar to a semicolon, we have the colon. You can think of it kind of like a finger pointing at something. It's telling the reader, you need to pay attention because I'm about to explain something or give you a list. A colon usually follows a full sentence and acts like a little bit of an announcement for what's coming next. He had only one goal, to win the race. So an example for a list would be something like, I need 7 things from the shop, colon, bread, comma, eggs, comma, milk, and so on and so forth. Now brackets and dashes both let you add a little bit of extra information, but they both have very different volumes. Brackets require extra details. If you take the brackets out, the sentence still works perfectly. It's for extra information. The teacher, who was kind, gave us homework. The sentence would still function if we took those brackets away. The teacher gave us homework, but we're given a little bit more information, and now we also know that the teacher is kind. Dashes are a lot more versatile. You can use a pair of dashes to create a strong pause, like the cottage, the one with the blue shutters, was sold. Or you can use a single dash to show a break in thought. I thought I'd feel happy, but I didn't. You can also use a dash towards the end of your sentence to really emphasize the point that you are making. There's only one thing left: run. If you're trying to write a story that is very tension based, that would be really, really good. We also need to talk about speech marks. So the trickiest part here is where you put the commas and the full stops. If the person speaks first, you use a comma inside of the speech marks before the tag. I'm ready, comma, said Tom. If the bit of dialogue comes last, the comma goes after the tag and the full stop goes inside the speech mark. So Tom said, comma, I'm ready. And if the speech is interrupted, you use a comma to pause, put in your tag, and then another comma to start again. I'm ready, comma, said Tom, comma, so let's go. We don't need a capital letter for so because we're continuing on the sentence. And the golden rule for using dialogue in your writing: whenever you have a new speaker, you need to start on a new line. Now, apostrophes have two very different jobs to do. Job one is omission, which is a fancy way of saying you're leaving something out. That is when you knock out a letter to join words together, like don't. Do not, we take out the O, we replace it with an apostrophe, we put them together, it becomes don't. Job 2 is possession, which shows that something belongs to someone. The dog's bone for one dog, the dog's apostrophe bones if there are more than one. So within the writing section of your exam, you're not only marked on the accuracy of which you use your punctuation, you're also marked on how you vary it. So if you are only using full stops and commas within your writing, you're limiting the amount of marks that you're able to achieve. If you make a conscious effort to vary your punctuation usage, add in a semicolon, add in a dash, some brackets, then you are demonstrating to the examiner that you are able to use punctuation for effect. Keep all of these things in mind, and if there's anything that you're not sure of, let me know. Punctuation.